Can you keep me on time? Because I know we're running a little bit late, and I do have a long talk. It's basically on my slides, so if I have to cut toward the end, you can look at the whole presentation slowly by yourselves. I'll leave it here so that you can have access to it. So thank you for the introduction, and I'm extremely pleased to be here in St. Petersburg for my very first, but unfortunately very quick visit. I hope to come back and study the city at greater detail than flying in, being in a conference and then flying out. My first book was Dreaming the Rational City, and I teach at Princeton University the undergraduate course on what's happening to cities in the 21st century. So the smart city is just one lecture, the informal city, the resilient city, the austerity city, and so forth. So this is a lecture that is constantly being improved and worked on, but it's gotten too big to insert everything in it. And I'm going back to my first book, The Rational City, and realizing that the smart city, the data city, the big data is returning us to a concept, a dream of the rational city. So it's kind of the hyper dream of the rational city. So let me see if I can make this work. I seem to. And I'm going to go quickly through these slides. As I said, most of my lecture is up on the board. It's a cliche to say that the 21st century is a century of cities. About 2007, that's the threshold. We heard about that this morning. So we're told that while we live in a century of cities, they yield no specific definition. What is a city? We can only say that they're going to play a really important role in generating information, ideas, and innovation. They're going to affect the entire globe with their resiliency or lack of it. But we seem somehow to not know exactly how to govern these cities effectively by securing the delivery of services, the quality of life, security for all citizens in the city. So that is where partly the smart city comes in. For most cities around the world, our tools to manage and plan those cities are out of date. Our land use codes, our zoning ordinance, our physical plans, or any kind of plan that you want to think of really stem back to the 60s. We haven't updated them. If you take a city such as New York City and you look at our zoning, it was put down in the 60s. It has not been updated since. It's a patchwork of overlays. Nobody seems to really know a lot about it. And I'm talking here now about Ram Koolhaas. I do teach in the School of Architecture, so I'm always trying to find architects who are talking about the smart cities. And he was delivering a lecture to the EU Smart City Conference a year ago. And he actually starts with a 94 essay, Whatever Happened to Urbanism? And he likened the urban professionals to chess players who've lost to computers. That goes way back in his discussion. And he wrote, a perverse autopilot constantly outwits all attempts at capturing the city, exhausts all ambitions of its definition, ridicules the most passionate assertion of its present failures, and each disaster that's foretold is somehow absorbed under the infinite blanketing of the urbanism. In other words, what is the city? What is urbanism? How can we begin to think about this? The city as a concept no longer exists, and any attempt to resuscitate it, he is saying, is doomed to failure. Now, those of you who read Michel Foucault would know that he would agree with Ram Koolhaas that the concept city has functioned since the Renaissance, he taught us, to substitute an abstract, rationalized, and totalized image for the real city. And since then, it's kept planners of space aloof from reality. And he was talking actually about the World Trade Center on the tower, of planners looking down to think about the rational view of the city as a two-dimensional graphic plane and erasing all the opacities and the voids in its sight in order to talk about that concept. But it's a misunderstood and erroneous concept. So what is the city, and how can we begin to think about it in terms of data? So I have argued, and this is the copy of my old book that goes back to the 1980s, that city planners and municipal governments have always approached the city with rational concepts in mind, to order, to control, to discipline the urban environment, but it remains an ideal project. because to the contrary, uncertainty, complexity, surprise, they rule the city. So as Kohlhaas and de Citeaux understood, a concept of instrumental rationality can never provide a comprehensive image of the city. It can never incorporate sufficient indicators to capture its full development patterns as they exist, as they change, as they morph over time, and enable policymakers, therefore, to shift these trends and direct their developments. It's always going to be an abstraction from the real processes that are going on in the city. And yet, in the 21st century, digital technologies and computational services offer the smart city and create a new dream of what I refer to as a hyper-rational city of the future. There are many, many definitions of what a smart city is. It could be called a digital city, an intelligent city, a network city, a cyber city, a smart, whatever term, we have yet to really define what a smart city is. But whatever the specific and local definitions of a smart city, they're based on three assumptions. That cities have been remediated by systems of information, big data, and that these systems can be mobilized to improve the functioning and management of cities, and that a set of entrepreneurial creative actors are the experts who will manage and run these cities. So in the last 2 decades, in addition to the rational city idea, has entered the scene the production of big data, and with it, a hyper-rational notion of the smart city. So with ICT, the information communication technologies, instrumentation, and the idea of ubiquitous computing, finally the dream of rationally managing a city is presumed to be a near reality. Via the harvesting, the analysis, the storage of vast quantities of data. And I think, as we previously heard, there are ways to deal with that visually, but not all the data that would be the absolute complexity of the city can be captured by that data. So one of the questions I'm going to ask this afternoon is, should physical planning or corporate management strategies guide the smart city? And I'm going back to Rem Koolhaas's statement last year. When the market economy took hold at the end of the 1970s, architects stopped writing manifestos. We stopped thinking about the city. At the exact moment of the explosion in urban substance in the developing world, the city triumphed. At the very moment that thinking about the city stopped. And then he turns to the smart city experts of the EU and he said, the smart city has stepped into that vacuum. But being commercial corporations, your work is changing the notion of the city itself. And so I think we need to look at the notion of the smart city that corporations are pushing at us. So it is promised the smart city is going to provide city services more efficiently and effectively. It will make a city more resilient against economic and environmental shock, and it will offer greater security and safety from disrupting forces. But they also seriously infringe upon citizens' privacy, and they are being used to profile and socially sort people. They enact forms of anticipatory governance, and they enable what is referred to as control creep, that is a reappropriation for uses beyond their initial design. And I think we have to be very, very smart ourselves about what that control creep is about. So what has happened to the physical city in the many definitions of a smart city? In any formulation of a data-driven programmable city, the physical city tends to become invisible or pushed to the background in what becomes an informational landscape. In the merger of technology assemblages and the urban terrain, and instrumental rationality dominates the planning and management of cities. It creates, in the word of one of the critics of the digitization of the world, a programmable urbanism in which space becomes almost invisible. So what has happened to the public space in the smart city? It has become coded space. Nearly every urban space is being remediated by code. The sensors, the cameras, the locative media embedded in infrastructure, in pavements and light posts transmit real-time data to command and control rooms. But coded information has come to be the iconic representation of the public space of the city. And so this flow of data tracks and changes over time. It's monitored for differences in weather patterns, for traffic or crime incidents or available parking spaces. And we've seen lots of images of disease being tracked in airports, on the street, and wherever, and so forth. But it indicates how well parts of the city are performing against measurable standards. And then this data flow are usually visualized in descriptive statistics or graphs or diagrams or overlaid on maps in manageable control rooms such as this one. Different panes of real-time data are scrutinizing for changing patterns in traffic flows and air quality and utility performance and people's motions within or near specific events and so forth. They advance a way of knowing the city that is visual, but one that depends on analytic measures. And they push to the side any type of anecdotal data or subjective knowledge and other blockages that plague a rational decision-making procedures. And GIS system, I would also say, adds to this abstraction of physical space. I may be a minority person talking here in terms of GIS systems, and so I apologize, but it also operates by pulling together hundreds of analytic algorithms and maps and data space and layering the city so that, again, the real space of the city tends to disappear behind these layers of data. So in the programmable smart city or data-driven governments, what's happened to democratic space? Jeffrey Bowker, who writes about lots of data formation in medicine and in geography and so forth, notes that data never comes raw. It is always cooked. So thinking of Levi-Strauss Raw and the Cook, but there are protocols that set what indicators best measure the state and performance of a city, and the use or purpose the indicators are to fulfill. And indicators are not neutral. They are shaped by a range of political positions. So again, we need to think deeply about this information system of the 21st century that has renewed the dream, the problems of the city thinking that they can be analyzed at the time they occur, their data fed back to operators who can modify the city's system, outcomes in real time. So information input is tied in this dream to action output. And yet the faster the information moves in digital form, the more it appears to dematerialize, no longer embedded in economic, social, political, and technological concepts, cultural contexts, and so forth, but contained within black box algorithms and codes. So we have an image here of what does it mean to be a smart city. IBM is one of the ones who is pushing this smart city or region, and I will spend some more time with IBM. So the inevitable result finds the city subjected to abstract representation based on a limited set of data. A city of data, currently defined as the smart city, is in an environment in which data flourishes. But who are the planners, the experts, the corporations producing knowledge from this data flow? And what technologies, what algorithms, networks link data points into relationships that then affect the actions and policy shifts? And what are the politics that govern this arrangement? How open or closed, how public or private is access to the data? And what data is collected and what data is ignored? Because data never comes raw, it is always cooked, and we cannot collect absolutely everything that reality produces. So many refer to what is happening as a post-political, post-democratic state of affairs. The smart city is marked by the invasion of a managerial logic into all aspects of government, reducing the political to administrative decision-making based on expert knowledge rather than political or ideological argumentation. It's within a framework of consensus formation, technocratic management, and problem-focused government, rather than contention and argument over various directions to go, alternatives that might or might not be included in the particular smart city algorithms and procedures or protocols. And we can also talk a lot about various books that are around that nation states can no longer discuss the problems that are facing cities in the 21st century. It's much better to turn to mayors. The mayors should rule the world, and there are lots of organizations of mayors mayors meeting around the globe in order to discuss city problems. So mayors are being moved into a central position. And why cities? Because cities already occupy the commanding heights of the global economy. They're home to more than half of the world's population, and they are the primary incubators of culture, social, and political innovations. And why mayors of these cities? Because mayors or city managers or whoever is the head of the city have to operate on day-to-day problems. They have to plow the streets, they have to pick up garbage, they have to provide parking spaces, they have to deliver water and energy and communication services and manage emergencies and all the things that we can think of that go into mapping the smart city to deliver these services. The mayors are the ones that, so we have cities, we have mayors, forget about the nations, not quite, but anyway, the smart cities are being targeted and pushed directly toward those mayors. And there's one other aspect, perhaps not here in St. Petersburg, but for many of the cities that I do discuss, is that there is a problem of urban austerity. And the question is, who's going to deliver these services the most efficiently? How are we going to do this when public administration budgets of cities are being cut? And is it possible that maybe corporations can deliver these services more effectively, more rationally, more with less dollars, rubles, yen, whatever currency we're dealing with. And so let's cut back whatever the nation state is offering to cities and allow the city somehow. Well, this is Detroit, so you know what I'm talking about when I talk about walk away from cities and urban devastation. So that also is putting a crunch on let's use our monies as effectively and efficiently as possible. So let me turn back to the smart city depending on mining data. And all of this you can read in great detail, but we're just inundated with more and more and more and more data that is flowing in from every kind of sensor. I seem to have lost my smartphone, and I'm hoping somebody will call me on it later so I can locate where it is, but it's wandering around somewhere, or I left it in my hotel room. A problem of having arrived just yesterday afternoon. So anyway, we have mobile phones, smartphones, smart cars, automatic number plate recognition systems, intelligent transportation systems, automatic meter reading systems, and radio frequency identifier, and social media, and Web 2.1 applications, and all about the internet and so on. We have data flowing in and flowing in. We're inundated with data. What do we do about this? There are 30 billion RFID tags. There are 1 billion cell phones. And these statistics are out of date. I have to always update them because the numbers are growing more and more. There are thousands of cable and satellite broadcast channels, not to mention Facebook users and bloggers and big data stored on the cloud and so on and so forth. It inundates us in the smart city. And so the problem is how to ask and how to enable policymakers, city officials to make wise decisions, to form partnerships with the powerful information and technology corporations who have monopolized the channels through which this information flows. How to ensure privacy of citizens who are part of this information flow, and how to maintain and attain an open democratic society. There are many different definitions of this instrumented city. This is just one I will give you. The engineering firm Arup has defined the smart city as one where the seams and structure of various urban systems are made clear, responsive, and even malleable via technology and design. And this requires a new kind of city government which exercises control over the logistics and communication grid of the smart city. And there are many other definitions of smart city, but that basically is one of them. So supposedly such data provides objective measures, truthful statements about social and economic conditions. It's devoid of political ideology, and it thus provides empirical evidence for policy formation and implementation. And it assumes that the smart entrepreneurial class are neutral manipulators of the collective data. But as of yet, there has been little critical focus on the new forms of data being produced or not produced, how they are being mobilized by business, by government and citizens, and the implication of real-time data analytics. And this is what I'm rushing through today. What is this cooperation in the smart city? These three components that are corporations, that are government and that are citizens, because the smart city very much depends on that collaborative work on all three components. So I also refer to the smart city as the sensor city, that creates an infrastructure of intelligent sensors and actuators, whether they're embedded in homes or offices or hospitals or public spaces or leisure environments. These provide the raw data and active responses. So automobile parking spots, that seems to be, every city seems to be able to think, we can do that. We can do that part of the smart city operation. So the sensing system or information infrastructure is becoming omnipresent. And this is just one city, Santander, which is calling itself a sensor city, and an image that it provides of itself. So there are new kinds of networks that will become pervasive in the future smart city. Mobile phones, computers, smart devices on daily objects will mean that more communication will result from machine to machine than from human to machine or human to human. So we have this M2M, machine to machine, in our future to think about, this Internet of Things. That Gartner, a IT consultancy based in Connecticut, predicts some 26 billion machine-readable devices that will exist by 2020. As of last year, there were 12.4 billion, so we have a way to grow in these machine-to-machine environments. And this is a little bit about Smart Santander, the sensors that are being used, but they're being used in cities around the world, including Cairo and Dubai and Kochi and Malaga and Yokohama and Sando. I'll return to a little bit of Sando, but again, a corporation that is interested, the Levele Corporation, it develops smart devices. Sensor Networks is locating many of these sensors for noise and for carbon monoxide and temperature and sunlight into this smart city, Smart Santander, that the EU is also quite interested in. So more than 12,000 sensors have been placed in and around the city's downtown, where they measure parking spaces, of course, trash and containers, the size of crowds on the sidewalk, the air pollution levels, and so on. And then that flows back to a bank of computers that analyze the real-time information and give the city officials the kind of big picture that allows them then to adjust the amount of energy they use, the number of trash pickups, so we have an efficient service needed, and even how much water to sprinkle on the lawns of city parks. You would think that a good city park keeper would know when the lawn needs water, but never mind, sensors can also tell you that. So there's a little bit of warning to say, you know, we have to think critically on where we need these sensors and what kind of information we need to gather. So this is more about Smart Santander. They're also creating apps about the pace of the city, so you can find out what's going on. And if I have a complaint here, it's that in New York City, I can't do a fast walk on the sidewalks anymore because everybody's bumping into me with their smartphones that they have to read all the time, and they can't learn to look around. And I don't know if that happens. I was told everybody here in St. Petersburg is terribly polite when you walk on the streets, not so in New York. So I get very angry about everybody. Can't you look at the street signs and see, you know, the grid of Manhattan? Do you really need to look at this all the time? But anyway, social media, whatever. Yeah, I do it too. Never mind. Can't find my phone. That's an obvious. So, you know, we can look at the smart cities and who is a smart city. And every time I look for a list, there are other cities that are up there. But yeah, but I want to turn and keep in your mind this alliance of governments and private corporations and civil society. All these are the collaborators. And I also want to talk a little bit about the UN Secretary telling the Tunis World Summit on the Information Society way back in 2006 that national governments have control over day-to-day technical and operational matters that do not impact on international public policy issues. So that means that nations have the right to control access to information flow, to the internet, and so on. There is no international organization that is going to intervene here. So it depends, the smart city, on open access to information flows, an open, ubiquitous commons, and yet we know that that commons is not as open as possible, and that access has been severely limited by government control over the internet in various countries, various nations around the world. So for me, the smart city raises many questions concerning the geometries of power and knowledge, of public versus private suppliers and managers of information, of expert versus citizen operators, of political technological assemblages within and between cities, and it raises concerns about surveillance and freedom, about accountability and critical assessment, and about how to overcome the digital divide. These are some of the questions and issues this talk is trying to consider. I'm sort of drawing a summary here while I keep going in my batter. But corporate control of the smart city has to be dealt with, and I'm going to take you through a little bit of that. The large information and communication corporations are pushing this concept of the smart city. General Electric has something they call the industrial internet. Cisco has the Internet of Everything. IBM has a smarter planet and smarter cities. Siemens has sustainable cities. They all have these big mega projects about making the cities of the globe smart. And they're producing this third industrial revolution. They're producing a global neural network. It is thought that to be a network that is open, that is distributed, that is collaborative, that is allowing anyone, anywhere, anytime to assess it and to utilize the data to manage and improve their daily lives. That is the rhetoric that goes along with this corporation. The interaction level is who should be in control of smart cities. Should it be top-down, come from the corporations, come from the government, or should it be bottom-up? Should it be comprehensive, citywide, or should it be small-scale, in little projects? And you have to start with some of this control of the corporations. I'm going to go quickly through this. Google controls 67% of search engines in the United States, 93% in Germany, 89% in the UK. These statistics have only gone up. Facebook has 77% of the global market in social networks. Twitter is expected to make more than $1 billion revenue in 2014. Again, I said these data needs to be upgraded, but in other, and I tried to do it just before coming here, but could not find the 2014-2015 information. But in other words, major sectors of the smart city are being monopolized by private corporation. Google owns search, Facebook controls social networking, Apple dominates online content delivery, and so forth. It's highly privatized. So if it depends on the collaboration of governments and private corporations and civil society, and I include research institutes in a university as part of that civil society, then we have to look at those corporations, and I have 3 minutes late. But it's not bad. I mean, I have much, much more to get to. I'm never even going to get to the fact that Google has a project to put balloons up in the air to link together the digital divide, the 80% of the world that isn't connected to the internet. And so does Facebook have another thing. And the one computer per child has now decided that they can talk about satellites, low-flying satellites, and get information content to Africa, to parts of India, parts of China, and so forth, if that is, they're not shut down by governments that don't like them. But anyway, we need to really question the profit motives. These corporations have a tendency to enclose content and traffic. Cisco and IBM view the smart city endeavor as a competitive field worth trillions of dollars, and so they're not exactly open to everything. And I would go into a little bit of Amsterdam. We've heard a lot about the Netherlands in the cooperation that you have with the University of Amsterdam. And I think Amsterdam is a really, really good case study of the smart city. It's a green city. It's also, how do you pronounce Smart Amsterdam, but the AR, it's Smart Amsterdam. Anyway, they've had that program for quite some time, and it's a good one to look at in terms of how this Cisco is operating with the government of Amsterdam to turn it into a smart city, and with the Internet of Everything. And I'm just going to go toward all the things that Cisco is doing with its dashboard and enabling citizens to be citizen sensors with their tablets and smartphone to talk about potholes, uncollectible trash, crime reports, and so on. We've heard here, there we go, and Amsterdam. That's the logo of the Smart City, the Lighthouse City projects. And I'm, the Internet of Everything that Cisco is cooperating about vehicles and building thermostats and street lights and motors and smart meters and vending machines and so forth, but all trying to think about that. And Smart Citizen Kit Amsterdam, you can get one of the, or you could at an experimental project, get one of these kits to be also a smart sensor. That the kit is an open source hardware device so that you can talk about or monitor carbon monoxide and other air pollutants in your particular neighborhood. I don't think it's working anymore, but I like to create all this. And of course, I'm not even going to tell you about the smart cities that architects are dreaming of and building with the help of Cisco and other IT corporations. This one happens to be the city of the future, Songdo, South Korea. It could be another city. Marketed as a smart city, Cisco is providing the digital plumbing, the wiring, every square inch of the city, running trunk lines and so forth. There will be telepresence in every home, office, and school via video conferencing. There will be sensors will regulate electricity and water use and so forth and so on. This is a great, wonderful city. It's being built. It is was supposed to open in 2015. I think that's almost finished that year. It's not going to be opened in 2016. It's way behind schedule, and it's maybe 1/3 developed, but never mind. There are smart cities. I think India has a project to build, how many of them? I can't remember.
100.
How?
100.
100, yeah, 100 smart cities. And of course, there's smart cities being built in the United Arab Emirates. I'm trying to think of even the name of it, which I can't think. So we have, I'm only partly through this grand lecture on the smart city, but I'm going to stop here. I think I've told you enough about some of the questions that we need to ask. I would go further on and be detailed about citizen sensors, how open that is, how important it is. I tried to be a city sensor last Christmas when the water main in front of my house blew up. The fire people came in, I wasn't home. I tried to call and find out who entered my house. No record. I tried to call, not use a smart citizen sensor. So I think this is a lot of hype and a lot of push by corporations. I think we have to back up a bit and really ask some very critical questions about what data we're collecting and what data we are not collecting, what our models can do and what our models cannot do. Like good scientists, we need to understand the technology of model building, and we need to ask, what does the model represent and what does it not represent? What can it do and what can it not do? In order to really see that we're not really, it's a hyper-rational city, but it's not covering every aspect of life in our cities. So thank you.